All of the events we've been talking about have been aimed at raising the profile of the Foundation. But bearing in mind that our primary purpose is to support the Scottish Studies programme at the University of Guelph, I went there recently to get a feel for what is going on. This is a rare books library which contains a magnificent collection of Scottish books and manuscripts, the largest single collection in existence outside of Scotland. Books are arranged by size, and the fragile nature of many of these publications means that they have to be stored under strictly controlled conditions of temperature and humidity. Many manuscripts like these are hundreds of years old and are priceless indeed. It is this heritage that the Scottish Studies Foundation aims to protect. This is a famous Fowlis collection. The Fowlis printing firm published for the University of Glasgow from 1739 to 1800 and was renowned for the high quality of its work.
Here's one of the treasures of the library, the Scottish collection at the University of Guelph. This is the Blue Atlas, which was published in the second half of the 17th century. And the Blue Atlas is just a series of maps of all the counties in Scotland. They're very rare to be in this intact form because dealers take these books, split them apart and sell them as prints, as wall hangings. What we have right here in front of us is Glasgow, and this would have been surveyed, I think, about 1650, 1660, somewhere around there, and you can see that Glasgow is a wee tiny place right here on the map. Just a tiny little place on the banks of the Clyde. You can see the bridge running across the Clyde, as it still does, and just a few houses. That was all Glasgow was before it became the great entrepot of the Atlantic trade in the 18th century.
One of the most interesting publications in the Fowlis collection is this book by Alan Ramsay. It's a poem entitled The Gentle Shepherd, and is one of the few illustrated books to be made by Fowlis. These woodblock reproductions were considered state-of-the-art almost 200 years ago.
What we have here is a collection of charters which at one time belonged to the family of the Sinclairs of Roslin, just outside Edinburgh. The earliest one's about 1491, and some of them go through to the 17th, 18th centuries. One of the more interesting documents in this collection is this one. It's a grant of 1542, by which James V of Scotland, that's the father of Mary Queen of Scots, granted the barony of Pentland to William Sinclair of Roslin. Now, what's really exciting about this document is the seal is still attached. This is in the same condition, practically, as it was when the document was first issued in 1542. And it's very rare indeed to find a seal which is still as well preserved as this. The front of the seal shows you the king sitting on his throne. The back of the seal, there's the king on his horse.
Now, quite obviously, a university is not just books, nor computers, bricks, mortar, or even concrete. A university is ideas, talent, creativity. Above all, a university is people. And it's the people I was looking forward to meeting at Guelph. I wanted to find out what Scottish Studies actually means for young Canadian students. Well, Elizabeth, to get the ball rolling, I'd like to find out what attracted you to the Scottish Studies programme. As a graduate, what enticed you to come here to Guelph?
Well, I actually did a graduate degree in Scottish history, and when I came back to Canada I wanted to see where I wanted to carry that on, and Guelph is the only place that actually specialises in Scottish studies, and I was fortunate enough to get a faculty position here with all these graduate students. And we've been able to, the program's been going for about 25 years now, and we've managed to build up a good reputation in Scottish studies and attract students who are interested in it from all over Canada, as some of these are representative of.
Margaret, you're a graduate student as well, so let me ask you the same question. What was the incentive for you to come to Guelph?
Well, for a lot of the same reasons as the other students here, that outside of Scotland, this is the best place to study Scottish history, and I have always been interested in Scottish history. I'm from Alberta originally and did my MA thesis there, but it was sort of very isolating there. I mean, no one else in the entire department had really anything to do with it, so it was really nice to come somewhere where there were other graduate students to talk to and faculty who had specialized. 3 faculty specialize in it, so it's certainly the best place to go unless you can go to Scotland.
Elizabeth, I'm curious, is there any way you're able to take the information you obtain in studying Scottish history and relate it to what's happening in Canada in the 1990s?
Well, there's a number of reasons. One is the background of many people in Canada who are of Scottish descent, but also the study of minorities, which Scots are a minority, although they may not appear as one in Canada. So the fact that we're able to concentrate on looking at one small area of the world and to have a large number of faculty and students involved in that, I think is very useful in a worldwide context as well as a Canadian context.
Mike, I'm personally curious about this, but the work that's going on here, how well is it accepted in Scotland? I mean, are people across there saying to themselves, what are these people in Canada doing, poking their noses into our history for? Or on the other hand, do they view it as a compliment?
Well, I think we've had a number of scholars over here from Scotland who have been to some of the conferences we have here at the university, and for the most part I think they've been more than impressed with the level of academics that's going on here, the sort of topics that are being dealt with, and I expect when they return to Scotland to their own universities they have a fairly good impression of the university and are fairly pleased with what's happening here.
Margaret, in the context of the 1990s, how relevant do you think the study of Scottish history actually is? I mean, can we really learn something from the past?
Well, some people believe you can learn from the past. I'm of 2 different minds. Sometimes I think we could and we should, but by the same token I don't know if we can. But my specialization is looking at Scottish women, and women's history is a relatively new field, and I certainly think that by looking at the experiences of women in the past that you can certainly learn something today about the experiences of women today.
Along the same lines, do you see any evidence of us repeating past mistakes?
Well, of course, everybody always repeats past mistakes. People not even just in Scotland. I mean, the world continually repeats the same mistakes. Mind you, I'm kind of a pessimist.
Well, maybe the circumstances are never exactly the same.
Well, to a certain extent, I suppose we just make the mistakes in a different way now.
Elizabeth, not being a historian, I might be tempted to think that concentrating on Scottish history results in a somewhat narrow focus. Scotland's a small country, and in terms of population was even smaller hundreds of years ago. Is this valid, or can you find, say, many common ties between European history that broaden the scope?
Well, there's 2 answers to that question. One is that by looking at Scottish history, we're looking at mainstream history from the periphery, and we're taking a different perspective on it, which I think is very important, because mainstream history has been dominated by the English, French, German experience. So by looking at it from the perspective of a smaller country, we can understand it in a different way. Secondly, I think the talk today demonstrated there's widespread links between Scotland and the rest of Europe. The Scots are one of the countries where people emigrate, well, throughout Europe and then throughout the world, of course. There's worldwide links as well. So looking at Scottish history is looking at much more than just the history of Scotland.
You mentioned before that you were studying the role of women in Scotland. In the course of this, did anything come to light that became something of a revelation to you?
Well, I'm particularly looking at the legal aspect, and a lot of the documents and legal statutes are saying that women are never supposed to appear in court and women didn't have any legal power. But what I'm finding is that women are appearing in court all the time, and that also women had especially widows, had quite a substantial power. I mean, they had a lot of independent power. So, there's this dichotomy between the theory and reality, which is quite interesting.
Andrew, I suppose there must be at least some cynics out there who might be saying, hey, wait a wee minute, This sounds like a group of cloistered academics working away on a totally obscure topic. And what's it got to do with day-to-day living? Meanwhile, there are all kinds of problems out there with the economy and the environment and all that. How do you answer that? I mean, how do you keep in touch with the Canadian community in today's world? Is it relevant?
I think it's very relevant. One of the things we try to do here is to get out of the Middle Ages and get out of the cloister and the ivory tower and get the community involved with the program. So we run a number of activities here several times a year where anyone who is interested can come and partake of these weekend workshops. We have 1 or 2 day workshops which have been run in the past on things like kings and queens of Scotland, invaders of Scotland, popular culture, witchcraft, and so on. We have 1 day colloquia in the spring and fall, where usually narrower themes are addressed. One coming up in March is on the Scots in Nova Scotia, so they're not necessarily restricted to just Scotland. The Scots in Canada is also of great interest at these things. And we also publish once a year a journal called Scottish Tradition, which tries to take these issues out to a wider audience, not only dealing again with Scotland, but also with the Scots in Canada, the Scots abroad, Scottish literature influence, and so on. So there are a lot of things that people can do, that we can do for the community, and that can get the community involved in this. It's not just a bunch of academics sitting around tables.
This may be a rather sensitive topic, but the other day I received this flyer, which obviously has utilised the stereotypical Harry Lauder image of the Scot. Perhaps not so much the Scots woman as the Scots man. And you know what I mean. A wee man in a kilt who's a wee bit tight with the money. How valid do you think that image is from a historical viewpoint? Is there any justification for it at all?
One of the things the Scottish Studies program does is try to get beyond the stereotype of the Scot. The wearing of the kilt it's an important part of Scottish identity for many Scots in Canada, but there's much more to being Scottish than that. The more negative aspects of that have tended to come out of propaganda in the 19th century, English propaganda in the 19th century, which is stereotypes of the Scots is one thing that a number of our students have looked at to try and get a more accurate picture of what Scots are really like in the past. So to get beyond the Harry Lauder image, if you like. And the Scots are a diverse people, and we look at Lowland Scots, Highland Scots, Island Scots, Orkney Scots, and they all have their own regional cultures, and so we're trying to understand the Scots as a whole, and again get beyond the stereotype.
Okay, what about the alleged stinginess though? Is there some deep historical reason for this? I mean, did the economic theories of Adam Smith have anything to do with it? Or am I just trying to be much too scientific about it?
Would you like me to answer?
Okay. Somebody else is an expert in this. Done a thesis on it.
That image largely develops in the 19th century, largely in Punch cartoons, actually, partly because Scotland was economically backward and people didn't have a lot of money. Before the 19th century, in fact, the Scots, especially the Highland Scots, were known for their hospitality to travellers, often giving up their bed if a traveller came. So that it's a very recent image. It's become a very prevalent one, but we like to blame it on the English, although perhaps we can't do that entirely. But I think a lot of it comes from the fact that Scotland has been economically a fairly poor country through most of its history, and so people haven't had a lot of money to throw around, and to travellers that would appear as stinginess. I don't think it's not an image that Scots hold of themselves. Certainly, they are the first to deny it, and Scots in Scotland get very angry with that stereotype, actually, and it's not true. If you go to Scotland today, Scots are not stingy, but the history shows that as well.
Mike, as a Canadian, do you feel it's important for Canadians to look beyond their own geographical boundaries and to get a different perspective on life as it exists elsewhere in the world today?
Well, because Canada in itself is so much a group from different nations throughout the world, I think it's good to have an idea of what these nations actually existed as before people came, or even today. And as Scotland does make up a good percentage of the early Canadian inhabitants, I feel that there's there is a need to study, there's a need to know what happened to people's ancestors, whether it be just their fathers or back to their great-great-grandfathers and grandmothers.
Mike, I suppose if you're in the business of studying Scottish history, it makes sense to actually go there. But does this present any special problems for students?
Well, I think partially due to lack of government funding, you have problems raising the finances necessary to go overseas. And despite the library's fine collection, occasionally you will come across some stuff that it would be necessary to travel to Scotland, as many of the graduates here have done.
Is it customary or even perhaps mandatory to go?
I don't know whether you'd say it's mandatory to go to Scotland, but there's something about studying an area or a place or even a certain subject, and never having been there, you don't have the same grasp on the subject, I don't believe. And I think most of the students that have managed to get money to go to Scotland have come back and their research has been better, and in the end product has been a finer piece of work.
Margaret, I guess these days everyone is under the gun financially. And as you know, it's the goal of the Scottish Studies Foundation to attract individual and corporate sponsors to provide additional support for the programme. Our immediate objective is to establish a chair of Scottish Studies. But is there anything else that comes to mind that we should be looking at?
Well, yeah, I mean, we always need funds to keep the program going, and certainly if people... you know, but Scots in Canada even are, you know, have had a lot to do with Canadian history, and I think that any support that people can give to the program at Guelph would be wonderful. I mean, we've got the best library outside of North America, but there's still works being published and still a lot of manuscript sources in Scotland that we could potentially get over here. So, I don't know.
But the top priority?
Chair of Scottish Studies, yeah.
Mike, what do you think I should be telling the people in the Scottish Studies Foundation? I mean, what help could the corporate sector be to you? Where would you put the priority? If there was one thing you'd like to see happen, what would it be?
Well, to say one thing would be difficult, but I think there is the travel aspect in terms of being able to study abroad would make a large difference. As well, some of the collections are quite costly, so in the end, to purchase them for the library, it's usually out of the range of the funding that we receive from both the government and some of our other sponsors.
Having spent most of your academic life in this type of program, how important is it for us to ensure that it survives?
Well, having spent some time here, I think it's extremely important. I mean, I look back on everything I've done, and I feel I've gotten a great deal from the program, and hopefully at least given some back along the way. Were it to come to a case where there was a question about whether the program would continue, I think there's more than just myself would be greatly disheartened by it.
Well, I do hope this video has given you a feel for what's going on at Guelph. The enthusiasm and dedication of both students and faculty alike is truly gratifying, and my visit there certainly convinced me that the Scottish Studies Foundation is an organisation with a truly worthwhile objective. Thank you for watching, and don't forget, we have a heritage. You can help protect it.